One of the things he talks about is how hospitals are actually incentivized by the federal government and health agencies to diagnose, test, and vaccinate people for COVID-19. He also shares key information about two really important documents that he suggests everyone signs before even needing to go to the hospital for any reason whatsoever, in order to tell hospitals exactly what you'll allow when it comes to your treatment. We'll also hear directly from Joshua Yoder, a commercial airline pilot and founding member of usfreedomflyers.org, after he recognized the urgent need for someone to advocate for pilots who have been experiencing devastating consequences from taking the COVID vaccine.
All right, so the very first intention behind anything that I do is trying to bring relevant information that helps preserve the lives of all people around the world. So number one thing, when COVID-19 started, the pandemic was announced into the American public and through the mass media. It became very apparent early on that there was a great threat to the life of anyone who goes into a hospital. It has always been from the beginning, early treatment outside of the hospital is your best bet for beating COVID or any other infection. So this QR code I created as a resource to provide forms, documentation, advocacy for people in hospitals, because a lot of people are being coerced, bullied, shamed, and scared to death that they're going to die from this COVID-19 respiratory infection. So on this QR code, the reason why I give this is because there's a resources tab for those who set up usernames and passwords on my site. And when you sign into your account or on that site, there's a resources page. And when you click it, when you open it, there's a form called the Medical Directive to Physicians form. Second is a form called Medical Power of Attorney form. And I believe that everyone in America needs to have these two forms downloaded, signed, and notarized before you ever think you need to go to a hospital. The hospitals, since the pandemic started in 2020, have now been set up with procedures and protocols that are actually incentivized by our federal government and health agencies. The hospitals are being bought off to follow through on all COVID-19 protocols. They're getting bonuses to diagnose you with COVID-19, test you for COVID-19, treat you for COVID-19, vaccinate you for COVID-19. This is what they're set up to do. You just don't know that. So if you sprained your ankle or you have a massively severe headache and that's what you think you need to go to a hospital for, you need to have two forms with you at all times. So please behave like you're in your third trimester of a pregnancy and you believe your water might break at any moment. Please have the Medical Directive to Physicians form. It tells the hospitals what you consent to in the way of treatment for COVID-19, what you believe, what your rationale, what your decisions around the COVID-19 vaccines are, because you don't want them doing that to you without your consent, which they are doing, by the way. So this is why this QR code is here, is to give you relevant information of how to advocate for your loved ones in a hospital, how it is to have forms outlined, signed, and notarized legal documents to protect you and your loved ones from being injured by the things we're going to share with you in this presentation. So that's the only reason why I put this up. My goal is to try to preserve as many lives as possible. Why do you need to be protected? This is why. All right, so that's what the QR code is for, is to give you access to documentation, things that can help improve your life, resources that can help protect you, and then how you can have legal recourse and documentation to protect you with your job that's being threatened with a vaccine mandate. We have medical and religious exemption forms. We've got the hospital forms. All of that is there for you. If you need an advocacy team for people in hospitals, if you go to the Get Help button on the drartistshow.com, it actually has a form that populates when you click Contact Michelle Routen's team. There's a team of advocates that represent all 50 states in America, Canada even now, and medical doctors are on their staff to help you with your ethics committee meetings in hospitals to get them to do what you want them to, other than what they're doing right now per COVID-19 protocols. So all that is on the drartistshow.com. That's why we set that up. And that's all free, by the way. Just go there. They'll set that up. All right, so what are my concerns around the hospitals? Why was it important to me to actually create all of these resources for you? Number one, my job is to try to bring awareness, educate you, and warn you of the things you should be doing, not be doing, so that you can make a better or informed consent decision on behalf of you and your health. Early treatment is best. Do not wait until you're really sick. If you're going to go to the hospital, remember this site. There's forms you should have at home for the rest of your life, as far as I'm concerned, because I don't see an end yet to this onslaught of medical tyranny and political tyranny. Your liberties and lives are being destroyed, being taken advantage of, and it appears that many men and organizations in the world do not care about preserving the lives of adults. Our elderly are being targeted with remdesivir and with the vaccines, and now they're coming after our children.
Our next speaker is Dr. Mark Sherwood. He talks about how using the right strategies can help you overcome coercion that the government has used to get us to conform to taking this COVID vaccine. This is largely rooted in staying true to our religious beliefs and holding them as a shield against the evils of the government.
So you go back and look at this idea of vaccines. It all started when the government got involved and transferred the liability from them, the vaccine companies, to the government. That's when the love of money came in there.
Yeah.
And they became profitable. And Bill Gates said something very powerful that I really would agree with. So don't shout me down now yet till you hear the explanation. He said the best investment he ever made was in vaccines. No risk, high reward. Pretty good deal.
Yeah.
The United States government, Anthony Fauci, are they involved in vaccines? You bet they are. Are they profiting from them? You bet they are. Check the boxes. You will know them by their fruits.
Yeah.
And
Conflict of interest right there.
That's it. That's enough said, right? So we just got to understand that. I encourage people to step up. Use the wisdom of God in making every decision. Make your decision based upon firm convictions, right? Now, we have seen in our world, we've written a ton of religious exemptions, ton of them. So far, they've all been accepted.
Really?
They have, because we've done them a certain way, with a certain method. We haven't just printed something off, had somebody sign it. Because we've actually had people call the clinic and say, hey, is Jonathan a part of your church that we wrote a letter for? Yes. I thought you were a clinic. Yes, we're a church too. Pretty simple. It's not hard, but we overcomplicate it. And so we've been really successful with that too. So
That's amazing.
yeah.
So the fact that you are a church, which some would say, well, no, you're a clinic, and you say, well, what is a church? And then even the word church in Greek is ecclesia, which is body. And
yeah, that's it.
Well, what makes a church? Well, okay, so you pray with your patients, you teach them the scriptures.
Bam.
Okay, yeah.
You get it.
Thank you. This is exactly though what the Bible talks about when it says, be as wise as serpents and as harmless as doves, because you're being wise in that, but it's a true answer, completely true, and it's in every sense of the word, and anyone that doesn't see that doesn't understand. No. They don't understand truth. They don't actually even understand what's being discussed here, what the whole spiritual process is all about connecting with God. And if you're a part of that, then if you didn't believe in God, then it would be completely false. Mm-hmm. Or teach His word, but you do. So why was it that was more effective for you to say that you were a church versus just a clinic? Because the religious exemption is the premise by which we can do this. Because it's interesting for me, and I think for the audience listening, that because as a doctor, you would think that you could say, okay, I give an exemption, this is a medical exemption, but you're saying that a religious exemption is more powerful right now than a medical exemption. Is that true? Or
yes, that is true.
Why is that?
Because we still have what's called the First Amendment. We have freedom of religion. Now, we can define religion all day long. But let's just say, for example, in this discussion, we're talking about the religion, even though it's not a religion, but we call the relationship with Jesus Christ, believing He's the Son of God that came to this earth, that died for our sin, rose again, and He lives right now so we can have life. And by confessing Him as our Lord and Savior, which I do, believing that He rose from the dead, which I do, I have eternal life. And because of that, I have a freedom based upon the First Amendment to worship Him anytime I want. And that's a freedom given to us by a God-birthed Constitution. So we can claim religious freedom. Now here's the kicker in this, that if you claim religious freedom, and it has to be according to EEOC, and sort of the idea of this freedom of religion concept in First Amendment, we have to believe that we have a sincere, firmly held conviction or religious belief. And when we do, when we have this, we can't be discriminated against. We can't be terminated or fired or anything like that. So that's what we're claiming here within this idea of religion. Now, first, my profession may be classified as a naturopathic doctor. We may have a business. We may be authors, movie producers, whatever you want to do. But that's not my profession. My profession is really as a believer. I'm a minister of the gospel. That's my profession. That's what I profess. That's what I speak out of my mouth. That's what I am always first. And within my ways that I make money and make a living and God supports that, I am still a believer. That's the point. And so I am a licensed minister as well. So when I speak with these people and when our staff speak with these people, we actually have a conversation with them. And I ask them this question, Jonathan, I really do. I say, tell me why you believe that you are wanting a religious exemption. And I make them tell me these things. It's just like, I'm not going to write something for somebody that I think is not a sincere belief. I'd be lying, right? So I ask them those questions. When they do, I give them the answers and I write them a letter. We do, with our name on the letter, saying I'm a naturopathic doctor and a licensed minister, and boom, 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 boom. Keep it short, sweet, to the point, and they get approved. Wow. Now, the reason that is bulletproof is because we still have the Constitution. Yeah. Is the Constitution being eroded away? Yes. But we still have it, right? We still have it. The Constitution of the United States is still birthed by a higher power, God. Yeah. We know that. Now, the reason it's more powerful is what I just laid out than the medical exemption is this. When you start to say things like, well, Dr. Jonathan, I would like to write me a medical exemption because I'm allergic to the ingredients of the vaccine.
Oh, wow.
Okay? What's in the vaccine?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Shooting a moving target here,
Which ones are you allergic to? And did you get tested for this? Have you had other vaccines before? And what was in those? See all the traps? There's holes all over that. Do you take ibuprofen? Do you take acetaminophen? Do you take an aspirin? Do you take other medicines? Because what they're going to do is they're going to trap people eventually in the idea that there's ingredient A that you say you're allergic to, but you've been taking ingredient A in this medication ever. And I'll tell you where they're going to go next. Mark my words on this. They're going to put those ingredients in food. And they're going to say, well, do you eat this food? Well, yes. Did you know that it had this in it? And you're going to look like a liar. So that's why we need to understand that the religious exemption, uttering the power of God to provide protection for us, is always going to be superior to the concept of medical exemption. Now, we've written some of them if we've had data that backed it up. But let people always go, if they have that sincere belief, right down the pathway of religious exemption first.
Amazing. And is it largely connected to the aborted fetal cell use, or is that a small part of it? Is it more about the fact that I have a sincerely held religious belief, which is that I don't want to put this in my body because I don't want to put this in my body, and that's what I want to do. And for example, like if I want to believe that God is loving and kind or vindictive and judgmental, like they're my choices, that's my religious view, and I have the freedom to choose that. And without the freedom to choose whatever I believe about God, I cannot really believe anything at all without that. So you can believe false things, true things, you can believe. So which is it that gives us the power? Is it simply that we are saying, I don't want this and therefore I will not have it, and it's because of my faith? Can somebody even that's not religious at all claim a religious exemption, or they just really can't? Because I would argue that somebody that doesn't believe in God, but they do believe in things, they do believe in love, they do believe, shouldn't they not be protected by religious exemption also? So what would you say?
Well, the answer is the latter you said is true. It doesn't really matter what you believe, because the concept and terminology of religion is, that definition is kind of man's best attempt to reach whatever they define as God. Right, so there's people that believe the universe is God. There's people that believe Allah is God. Yeah. Right. There's people that believe, in Hindu religion, for example. Yeah. So we can lay this out all day long, but the bottom line is these religions are recognized religions, using that word again, under man's definition, as viable religions that we hold to be true. If you have a conviction in any of these religions any of them, that you don't believe that in those religions, in those practices of those religions, that within that, to choose to not want to put a vaccine in your body or any medication or anything you want to do, period, you can hold that line. Yeah. That's the intent. Yeah. Now again, I defined a few moments ago of what I believe that my faith holds. That's me. And I'll put it back on God every time, and I'll say, God didn't want me to do this. Who's going to argue with that?
Sure.
Right? So you could say, that Allah doesn't want me to do this. Now, that's up to you, right? You mentioned, could people claim that and not believe that? I suppose we can lie. Yes. That's a freedom. You could do that. But we want to stay away, in my strong opinion, from the mention of fetal cells. Not that that's not true, but because somebody might trap you in that. If you give somebody too much information and you speak too much, it opens up holes. Yep. So we keep our religious exemption letters very short, just like you said. It was brilliantly said. There's no reason to go any deeper than that. It doesn't matter. That's your firm belief, period, end of story. I don't need to explain myself. Yeah. That's what I have. Now, if you start saying, well, this is used in aborted fetal tissues or contains fetal tissues or contains graphic oxide or contains razor blades and graphic oxide that will cut your cells up, I get all that stuff. But again, what other vaccines have been used to test on these aborted fetal cell lines? Have you taken those? Because see, this wasn't a discussion until recently. And so we're kind of like saying, well, this vaccine today is so much different, there's nothing like it. That's not a true statement. They've always used vaccines to test them on these lines. Yeah. That's how they test, right? Graphene oxide. Check the amount of graphene oxide in your burger and fries, folks.
Yeah, true.
It's like we are getting so distracted from the real issue.
Wow.
Right? So I'm dropping what I would consider truth bombs here. Yeah. I hope people really catch this, because don't get distracted in the controversy. If you get distracted in the controversy, you'll make bad, tactical, emotion, reaction-filled decisions that will cost you something. Everything must be ran through the filter of God. If it doesn't go through the filter, if it doesn't fit in that top of leave it alone. Just leave it alone. So you people that have seen us at these reawakening tours we spoke and wherever we are, we're very consistent with our message. And I'm not going to get in the weeds. Why would I get in the weeds? I'm here in the light, man. The weeds bring distraction.
Yeah. They
bring confusion. If you get stuck in the weeds, man, what about the grass? Yeah. Weeds are, the Bible talks about weeds.
They get uprooted.
Bam. I don't spend my time in the weeds. I spend my time out here in truth.
Isn't that something?
Right. It's just a different way to look at it. I'm hoping people will be will experience freedom from even listening to our time.
Amazing. I think I really appreciate that. There's some things here that I think are very helpful. One thing that I wanted to mention, if somebody has made an exemption or requested for exemption, they had in their letter that they do not want to put aborted fetal cells in their body or something like that, and they get pinned with this issue where aspirin was tested on those fetal cell lines. Good point. You've framed that well. And I think the argument to say back to that, if you're already in this argument, would be to say, and I no longer want to take aspirins because of my now knowledge of this, and that's part of a religious worldview, that you can also change your position. Yes, I've taken them in the past. No, I no longer want to take them. That's just one thought I thought of, because some people are already in this now. They've already used the aborted fetal cell.
Yeah, and I think one thing to add to this, and I think that is a viable answer. I'm going to give you one more that I think is fitting for this, and we've done this. If you've submitted a request for religious exemption, and if there's a question back from that discussion, from an HR, whatever, and the question asked is, do you take aspirin? Here's your answer. This is a religious exemption request, not a medical exemption request. Period. See, they'll switch the lingo on you, they'll switch the narrative on you, and they'll try to switch it and merge, confuse, and converge that medical exemption into one. And the more information you give them, what you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. I read that somewhere. I used to be in law enforcement. So you have to watch your words carefully. If someone comes back and said, well, what about, do you take this, take this, take this? This is a religious exemption request, not a medical exemption, period. You will set them on their heels every time. That's just wisdom.
That's awesome. Yeah, we stand behind the Constitution and the Constitution of countries that have religious premises. I suppose that people in China may be in a difficult situation there, but nevertheless, these principles are still always the same in essence. I think one of the things that people need to understand is our heritage as to what helped to form the Constitution, and that is the liberty of conscience. So the Dark Ages was really ended by the Protestant Reformation, notably Napoleon had put the Pope in jail in 1798, and that like ended the Dark Ages per se. But it was really the event of the events of the 1500s and those preceding that, from brilliant and amazing men like John Wycliffe and Jerome and Huss, and then Luther and Calvin. And so when Luther stood before the Diet of Worms and he said before all these dignitaries, I cannot go against my conscience. For a Christian, it is unsafe. This is really the premise by which he stood his ground. This is what really forged this liberty of conscience issue. This is what he was saying. This is my conscience. He said, this is the only ability I have to serve and follow God. This is the only way by which I understand that I can obtain eternal life, because if I can no longer think for myself, I can no longer choose good or evil, and so I can't choose anything. And so I cannot be good, I cannot do good if I cannot choose, because like a robot, for example, can't do good or evil. He can only do that which he's programmed to do. And then naturally, if we're in the hands of wicked people, then all we can do evil by not following our conscience. So we stand by our conscience. And then he said, so help me God. And he stood, and here I stand, I can do no other. And this is the stance that we take. I can't stand anywhere else. I have to listen to God's conviction over my life. I believe I can't take this.
Yeah, there's 2 points to that. What you're describing is called the doctrine of the lesser magistrates. A very good concept. A guy wrote a book named Matthew Torella. I encourage people to get that book. But when you talk about the ability and the rationale for standing up for what you believe, if a law is proclaimed, or an edict is given, or a rule is conferred, or an opinion is generated that conflicts with your own deeply held religious belief, just like you said Luther did, right? Standing up for that is not an option. It's your duty. It's your duty. And this is a big deal. In our campaign, it's interesting you said that. Sure. We have these shirts that says, when tyranny becomes the law, defiance becomes your duty. It's not an option anymore. And we need to be willing to die for those causes. That's what those men did back in 1775 when they signed their name to the King of Britain and said, you know what? I'm willing to die for this. This is a law that I'm not going to follow anymore because it contradicts God's law, right? So we understand that. The second part of that whole concept, Jonathan, is this idea that socialism and Marxism, right, communism, however you want to lump it in there, is always about taking the choices away from people and putting them in control of dictators to tell you what to do. In other words, you become just robots, which is why in all of those, Christianity or the following of God is always going to be a point of persecution. That's why, the Jews were persecuted. That's why Christians have always been persecuted, because the concept of Christianity or religious choice or faith choice is something that does not stand in agreement with socialism or Marxism. It can't do it. It's two different things. So that becomes a threat. And that's why my wife and I today, and you, as we stand here and sit here and talk about this stuff, we are a threat to the agenda of the United States of America right now, those in charge. Their agenda is to control and overpower and dominate under the guise and intent of we can feed you, we can clothe you, we can protect you, we can care for you. It's not their job. It's our job.
True.
Self-governance. And so it's a big deal, a big discussion topic, and people need to really wrap their arms around that. And my concern is for the next generation that have been so robotically trained by the computer generation of social media and all this stuff, and get so polar narratized, I call it. They get so stuck in there that they can't seem to think for themselves. The power to think for yourself is the greatest power given to us by God Himself. Yeah. Which I think is just amazing. So we need to wrap our arms around that and always think for yourself.
Beautiful. Isn't that amazing? That's what makes us an expression of the divine, and the beauty of the fact that I have two little boys, and yesterday my wife said, "Do you want Thai food?" And he said, "No, I want dada." And I'm not with him right now, and so like my wife and the friend, they wanted to cry, and the fact that he could say that is what makes that beautiful. If it's that freedom to be able to say what you think, and the fact that he loves me, that I love him, it's a voluntary response. It's not something we have to do. So it's like you have to think about everything beautiful in your life is because you have the choice to think and do these things. And like a young child's, that he can say and think what he chooses to say and think, and that is beautiful, and that's what we strive for.
Indeed. The question that people ask, why and why not? I know we get tired of hearing it, but those are two of the most powerful questions ever. And I think our Father God wants us to ask those questions. We ask Him why not? And that's something that's driven my wife and I, really all of our life. They say, well, you can't do this, it can't be done, why not? And you say, this is always how it's done, why? So we question the status quo. May people that listen to this video always question the status quo. We can always do better. We can always accomplish the impossible. The unlimited potential of the human experience with the divine empowerment is something that we should hold in great awe and honor to be able to achieve anything.
Mark, why does that move you?
It's God. It's God. People need to understand that God is real. And people that are even watching right now, I just encourage you to, seek Him out. If you don't believe what I'm saying, I really don't care. It's not my point. But in my life, if you say, God, I want you to show me if you're real. I want you to show me if you're true and show me what truth is. He'll show you. And when He does, there is freedom in knowing truth. And I just leave it at that for people just to think upon. My life, my wife's life, we live fearless and hopeful. I don't care if somebody has a fever or a virus. I really don't. If they want a hug, I'm going to give them a hug, and I don't care. I really don't. We haven't looked at this virus as anything other than just a distraction from the truth. I'm just like a gnat. Get out of my way. The real issue is there's people out there that don't know truth. My job on this earth, my wife's job on this earth, is to communicate just what I said to you. That's our whole job. Whether we're naturopathic doctors, whether we're movie makers, authors, or governors, that's our job. And we're going to stay with that line because that's a line that brings great healing to the land.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I think the privilege here is that you're helping people to learn how to operate from a place where they cannot be shaken. And that's the key. That's what's going to save lives as we move into the future. When we become immovable, then we cannot be forced into situations that compromise our health. And God will open the doors for us. And you see this with people like Desmond Doss, who refused to carry a gun. That was his choice. He was following his conscience. He was a conscientious objector. That's what we do when we choose not to have this. We're a conscientious objector. We're doing that from a point of, we will not take this based on our conscience. And then as he goes into war, 75 men rescued off an escarpment in one night in an area where people were being sawn in half with machine gun bullets. And how is it that one man can rescue this many people in this time? There was a Japanese soldier that said 6 times he had him in his crosshair, and every time he'd pull the trigger it would jam, and every time he'd take it off him it would fire. How is it that this man was protected? And these are the things that we need to say, God, you will be my protection. And as it looks like the world is falling in and all of the walls are caving in on us, we say, God, you are my protection. I will trust in you because you are good, and I know that you love me and you have my best intentions at heart. I trust you. And these are the things that will hold people in these times, even if people have never known how to have faith before or had a broken relationship with their faith and felt that they just didn't feel that connection. We can trust, and we can learn to trust. It's not something that if we haven't nurtured in the past, it doesn't matter. It's about what we do now. And so I appreciate so much of what you shared. Before you leave us, Dr. Sherwood, if you could just mention, how would you list an exemption? What would be a few of the words that you would put in there, yeah, roughly? I mean,
the religious exemption? Yeah, we say, I've discussed this person's situation. I've listened to their concern about this being the temple of God and their faith in God. I believe their story. They appear to be very conscientious. I use that word, conscientious, and aware of what they're saying and aware of the consequences of potentially not taking a vaccine. Therefore, I believe them and their story, and I support their conviction as a licensed minister. We respectfully ask for an exemption from taking the COVID vaccine. Pretty simple.
Awesome. Awesome. And that there is a kindness in that appeal as well, or it's a respectful appeal, because you're appealing to an authority that has been usurped, and yet you still appeal in that authority. It's kind of like Christ when he was standing before governors that were corrupted, yet he would speak in kindness to them and appeal to them and ask them to do that which was right. That's a correct measure to take.
It is, and it's biblical. The way you mentioned the example of Jesus, you also the example of Daniel. Daniel was granted favor with the guard. It wasn't because he was a jerk or a butthead. You show respect for those that are in authority. Even if they don't agree with you and you don't agree with them, you still address them with respect. Because if you don't, that's counterintuitive to the world we walk in. If you want to get favor, you learn to treat people with respect, whether they agree with you or not.
Also, before you go, you're a naturopath, so I really want to ask this.